What if the thing that has been holding you back from everything you want is not your weakness, but your refusal to look at it? Most people spend their entire lives trying to be better. Trying to be kinder, more patient, more positive, more disciplined. They read the books. They follow the advice. They build the habits. And still, at some point, something inside them breaks the plan. An explosion of anger that costs them a relationship. A surge of envy that poisons a friendship. A hidden hunger for control that surfaces in ways that embarrass them later. And they look at themselves afterward with something between shame and confusion, wondering why, no matter how hard they try to be good, something darker keeps pushing through. What nobody tells them, what the self-help world almost universally refuses to say, is that the darkness is not the problem. Pretending it is not there is the problem. And the gap between those two things is where most people's potential quietly disappears. Niccolo Machiavelli was one of the first thinkers in Western history to say, with complete clarity and zero apology, that human beings are complex. That ambition, anger, fear, jealousy, and the hunger for power are not flaws to be eradicated. They are forces to be understood. And then, crucially, to be mastered. He looked at the world as it actually was, not as idealists wished it to be, and he drew a map that still holds. The people who reach the highest levels of success, influence, and inner authority are not the people who never feel dark impulses. They are the people who know exactly what those impulses are, where they come from, and how to use them without being used by them. They have done the work that most people are too frightened to begin. They have looked directly into the parts of themselves that are uncomfortable, and instead of flinching, they learned from what they saw. In this video, we are going to go deep into what Machiavelli's philosophy actually reveals about the shadow side of human nature, and more importantly, what it means to master it. Not suppress it. Not perform your way around it. Master it. By the end of this, you are going to understand why your so-called dark side is not your enemy. It is the most underused resource you have. And the moment you stop running from it and start working with it, everything changes. If you are the kind of person who wants to understand human nature at the deepest level, the kind that most content never touches, like this video and subscribe right now. This channel goes where others won't. And what we are about to get into is exactly the kind of truth that changes how you see yourself and everyone around you. Here is the problem with the way most people are taught to think about their darker impulses. From the time we are children, we are given a very simple, very binary framework. Good emotions are acceptable. Bad emotions are shameful. Kindness is a virtue. Anger is a failure. Ambition is dangerous. Jealousy is ugly. And so from a very early age, most people begin the project of self-editing. They learn to hide the parts of themselves that the world has labeled unacceptable. They push the anger down. They reframe jealousy as concern. They disguise the hunger for recognition as passion for the work. And here is what that produces. Not purity. Not virtue. Not emotional freedom. What it produces is a shadow, a psychological term for all the parts of yourself you have disowned. And the shadow does not disappear because you refuse to look at it. It grows. It accumulates. It finds ways of expressing itself that you cannot see coming because you have spent so long denying it exists. The executive who leads every meeting with warmth and positivity but explodes privately when challenged. The partner who says they never get jealous but quietly sabotages their loved one's success. The person who tells everyone they are fine, fine, always fine, until one day they are not, and the damage done in that moment is completely disproportionate to the trigger. These are not random failures of character. They are the predictable result of unmastered shadow. Of internal forces that were never integrated, only suppressed. Machiavelli's genius was in refusing this self-deception. He looked at powerful people with clear eyes and saw what they actually were, not what they presented. He saw that the most dangerous person in any power structure was not the one who acknowledged their ambition, their fear, their capacity for ruthlessness. The most dangerous person was the one who denied it. Because the one who denies it has no control over it. They are run by forces they will not name. That is the insight that changes everything. And it is where we begin. Part 1: The Anatomy of the Dark Side. Before we can talk about mastering the dark side, we have to be precise about what we are actually talking about. Because when most people hear the phrase dark side, they think of villainy. They think of cruelty, manipulation, and harm. But that is not what Machiavelli was pointing to. And it is not what we are discussing here. The dark side, in the Machiavellian sense, refers to the full spectrum of human impulses that exist beneath the socially acceptable surface. It is the anger you feel when someone dismisses you in public. It is the envy that rises when a peer achieves something you wanted. It is the ambition that burns at 2 in the morning when you know you are capable of more than your current situation reflects. It is the fear that sometimes masquerades as aggression. It is the need for control that shows up in your relationships as something you call care but that those closest to you experience as pressure. These are not exceptional experiences. They are universal ones. Every human being who has ever lived has known these forces from the inside. The difference between people who build great things and people who spiral into self-destruction is not the presence or absence of these impulses. It is what they do with them. The first and most critical step in mastering the dark side is naming it with brutal honesty. Not vague, comfortable honesty, the kind where you say, I can get a little frustrated sometimes, when what is actually true is I have a hair-trigger temper that I have never fully examined. Real honesty. The kind that requires sitting alone with yourself and asking difficult questions without immediately rushing to your own defense. What makes you angry? Not inconvenienced, actually, deeply angry. Trace it back. Because anger is almost never about the immediate trigger. It is a signal. A message from something deeper, usually a violated boundary, an unmet need, or a wound that was never properly addressed. The person who knows their anger at this level is not less dangerous than the person who suppresses it. They are more powerful. Because they can feel it arriving, understand what it is telling them, and choose how to respond rather than simply reacting. The same is true of envy. Most people treat envy as purely corrosive, a thing to be ashamed of and quickly hidden. But Machiavelli's realism offers a different read. Envy is directional information. It tells you what you want. It points at the gap between where you are and where your deeper nature knows you could be. The person who can sit with their envy long enough to ask, what is this actually showing me about my own desires, has just converted a potentially destructive force into a navigational tool. And then there is pride. Not the hollow, fragile kind that collapses under criticism, but the deep, almost primal sense of one's own dignity that rises when that dignity is threatened. Machiavelli understood that pride, channeled correctly, is one of the most powerful motivators a human being possesses. It is what makes a person refuse to be diminished. Refuse to accept a life smaller than what they are capable of building. The problem is not pride. The problem is pride without wisdom. Pride without self-knowledge. Pride that has never been examined and therefore cannot be directed. None of these forces are your enemies. But every single one of them will destroy you if you let them operate in the dark. And that is only the beginning of what Machiavelli's framework reveals. Part 2: What Unmastered Darkness Costs You. Let us talk about what it actually looks like in real life when someone refuses to master their dark side. Because the cost is not abstract. It is specific. It is visible. And once you know what to look for, you will see it everywhere. The first cost is what we might call emotional hijacking. This is when an unexamined impulse takes over a situation in a moment and makes a decision that the rational, long-term thinking part of you would never make. You say something in anger that cannot be unsaid. You make a decision from fear that you regret for years. You act from jealousy in a way that destroys something you were actually trying to protect. The hijacking is fast, often almost invisible in the moment, and the damage it leaves behind is completely disproportionate to whatever triggered it. Machiavelli wrote extensively about the prince who lets passion override judgment. He saw it destroy leaders who were otherwise brilliant. Not because they were bad people, because they were unexamined people. They had built elaborate external empires while leaving their internal architecture completely unmapped. And when pressure came, when betrayal hit, when failure arrived, when someone questioned their authority in public, the unmapped interior became the site of their collapse. The second cost is strategic blindness. When you are operating from unacknowledged fear, you cannot see danger clearly. When you are driven by unacknowledged envy, you misread other people's motives. When your need for control is running silently in the background, you misinterpret collaboration as a threat. The dark side, when it operates unconsciously, does not just affect your behavior. It distorts your perception. You begin to see the world through the lens of whatever wound or impulse is running the show, and you make decisions based on a reality that is significantly less accurate than the one you think you are seeing. This is one of the most dangerous things about unmastered shadow, not what it makes you do, but what it makes you miss. The opportunity you cannot see because your unacknowledged fear has already dismissed it. The ally you cannot recognize because your unexamined envy has already made them an enemy. The relationship you cannot build because your unresolved need for control has already started testing it to destruction. The third cost is what might be called leakage. Your unmastered dark side does not stay internal. It leaks out in ways you often cannot see but that everyone around you can feel. It leaks in tone, in the subtle edge in your voice when something triggers you. In this way you become slightly colder when someone else succeeds. In the micro-expressions that flash across your face for half a second before you reassemble the acceptable presentation. People around you sense these leaks. They may not be able to articulate them, but they respond to them. They become slightly more guarded, slightly less open, slightly less willing to trust you with the things that actually matter. And you wonder why intimacy always seems to reach a certain depth and then stop. But the real danger starts when someone else learns to read your unmastered dark side before you do. Because there are people in the world who are specifically skilled at identifying unexamined wounds, unacknowledged fears, and uncontrolled impulses in others. And they use that information. Not always consciously, but with remarkable effectiveness. The person who sees your hidden hunger for validation will feed it strategically until you are dependent on them. The person who senses your unresolved anger will know exactly which buttons to press to make you explosive in situations that damage you, not them. The person who reads your underlying fear of abandonment will use it to keep you compliant through subtle threats they never have to make explicit. Your unmastered dark side is not just a private liability. In the hands of certain people, it becomes a tool they use against you. And most people never understand this is happening because they were never willing to look at themselves clearly enough to see the vulnerability. We are at the turning point of this video. And if what we have covered so far has felt personal, if you have recognized yourself or someone in your life in any of this, that recognition is valuable. Do not dismiss it. It is exactly the kind of uncomfortable clarity that Machiavelli was pointing to when he said the most dangerous thing a person can do is lie to themselves about what they are. So here is a question I want you to sit with, and I want you to answer it honestly in the comments. What is the one dark impulse, anger, jealousy, pride, fear, the need for control, that you know, if you are completely truthful with yourself, has cost you the most? Not in theory. In your actual life. Because the answer to that question is the starting point of everything we are about to talk about. Part 3: How to actually master it. So we have established what the dark side actually is, and we have been honest about what it costs when it goes unmastered. Now comes the part that Machiavelli spent his career pointing toward, not the acknowledgement of darkness, but the mastery of it. And this is where most content on this topic goes vague, because mastery sounds like a destination. Like something you arrive at. It is not. It is a practice. And it has specific components. The first component is ruthless self-observation. Not self-judgment. Not self-punishment. Observation. The ability to watch yourself, your reactions, your patterns, your emotional triggers, with the same clear, analytical attention that you would bring to studying an opponent. What makes you contract? What makes you reactive? What situations consistently bring out a version of you that you are not proud of? These are not rhetorical questions. They are data points. And the person who collects them honestly has an enormous advantage over the person who cannot bear to look. Machiavelli was a keen observer of human pattern. He believed that understanding behavior, including one's own, was the foundation of strategic intelligence. The leader who knows that he becomes irrational under a specific kind of pressure can plan around it. Can structure his environment and his decisions so that those pressure points are not exploited. Can hand off certain decisions to advisors when he recognizes that his own judgment is compromised by emotion in that domain. This is not a weakness. It is architecture. It is building your life around what you actually are rather than the idealized version of yourself you wish you were. The second component is what we might call controlled use. Once you understand your dark side clearly, you can begin to use its energy deliberately. Anger, for example, when it is fully conscious, can be an extraordinary motivator. The anger at injustice that drives someone to build something better. The anger at their own mediocrity that drives someone to outperform every expectation anyone had of them. This is not suppressed anger finding an outlet. This is anger recognized, understood, and consciously redirected toward a purpose that actually serves the life you want to build. The same applies to ambition. Unexamined ambition creates chaos, reckless decisions, burned bridges, the kind of drive that destroys everything around it in pursuit of a goal that shifts constantly. But conscious, examined ambition, ambition that has been interrogated, refined, and connected to genuine purpose, is one of the most powerful forces in human achievement. Machiavelli did not fear ambition. He feared ambition that did not know itself. The third component is emotional timing. One of the most sophisticated skills in Machiavellian thinking is knowing when to express, when to withhold, and when to deploy what you are feeling for strategic effect. This is not manipulation in the negative sense. It is the discipline of a person who has enough self-knowledge to manage the timing of their emotional expression rather than being at the mercy of it. The person who can feel intense anger and choose not to express it in this particular moment because the timing is wrong, and then address it later, calmly, in a context where it actually changes something, that person operates at a level most people never reach. The fourth component is integration. And this is the piece that separates genuine mastery from mere management. Integration means that you have stopped experiencing your darker impulses as alien invaders in an otherwise civilized interior. You have understood them as yours. As part of the full complexity of who you are. You carry your anger without being explosive. You carry your ambition without being reckless. You carry your pride without being brittle. You carry your fear without letting it run your decisions. Not because you have conquered these forces, but because you have made peace with them. Because you have looked at all of it, the whole, complicated, messy truth of your inner life, and decided that you are capable of working with all of it rather than only the parts you are comfortable presenting to the world. And when a person reaches that level of integration, something extraordinary begins to happen in how they move through the world. Here is the insight that most people never reach. And it is the one that Machiavelli's entire body of work was, in a sense, building toward. The people who are most dangerous to you are not the ones who are openly cruel. They are not the ones whose darkness is visible. They are the ones whose darkness is invisible to themselves. Because the person who does not know their own shadow cannot control where it falls. They believe they are acting from principle when they are actually acting from a wound. They believe they are leading from strength when they are actually leading from fear. They believe they are protecting their people when they are actually protecting their ego. And here is where this becomes deeply personal for the people watching this. If you have ever been hurt by someone who genuinely seemed to believe they were doing nothing wrong, if you have ever been in a relationship with someone whose cruelty was invisible to them, whose manipulation had the absolute conviction of righteousness behind it, you have experienced exactly what unmastered shadow looks like from the outside. It looks like someone who is completely certain they are right. Someone whose emotional reality is airtight. Someone who has constructed an internal story in which they are always the reasonable one and you are always the problem. That certainty is not strength. That certainty is the armor of someone who has never done the terrifying, humbling work of looking at themselves honestly. And it is, without question, one of the most destructive forces in human relationships. Because people who cannot see their own darkness do not just carry it. They project it onto partners, onto colleagues, onto their children. And the people around them absorb damage from a source that insists it is actually a source of light. The person who has done the work, who has sat with their own darkness and learned its shape, becomes almost immune to this dynamic. Not because they are never hurt, but because they can see it for what it is. They recognize projected shadow when it lands on them. They do not absorb it as truth. They understand the mechanism. And that understanding is, in its own quiet way, an armor that nothing can penetrate. Machiavelli's deepest teaching was not about how to manipulate others. It was about how to see clearly yourself first, and then the world. And the person who sees clearly is the hardest person in any room to deceive, to manipulate, or to destroy. We started this video with a question about what might be holding you back. And after everything we have walked through together, the answer is clearer now. It is not your talent. It is not your circumstances. It is not even your darkest impulse. It is the refusal to look at it. Every person who has ever built something that lasted, survived something that would have broken most people, or moved through the world with that particular quality of unshakable authority, every one of them had to do this work. The work of looking inward without flinching. Of naming what is there honestly. Of learning the shape of their own anger, fear, ambition, and pride with enough precision to stop being run by those forces and start directing them. Your dark side is not your enemy. It is the unrefined version of your power. The anger, fully understood, becomes the force that refuses to accept less than what you deserve. The fear, fully examined, becomes the intelligence that keeps you from walking into situations that would destroy you. The ambition, fully integrated, becomes the engine that outlasts every obstacle. The pride, properly directed, becomes the standard you hold yourself to when no one else is watching. Machiavelli did not write for idealists. He wrote for people who wanted to succeed in the real world, the complicated, difficult, often unfair world that actually exists. And what he understood, at the deepest level, was that success in that world begins not with strategy, not with resources, not even with intelligence. It begins with self-knowledge. Deep, honest, unflinching self-knowledge that includes the full truth of who you are. When you stop fearing your shadow and start mastering it, the world becomes a different place. Not easier, but clearer. And in that clarity, you will find a kind of power that cannot be taken from you, because it was never given to you by anyone else. Thank you for watching this all the way through. If something here resonated, if this is the kind of deep, honest conversation about human nature you have been looking for, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe so you never miss what comes next on this channel. And the next video is already waiting for you. Click it now. Because this is only the beginning of what we are building here together.